Listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jonathan Travers from ERS. Looks like we've got almost a majority of the folks who had registered for this on the line here. So we're going to give another minute or two to give a few more folks an opportunity to join, and then we'll get started. It looks like we've got a couple more folks here, so I'm gonna get us underway. Thanks everybody for joining this this session on linking student-based budgeting with strategic school design. We've got a great conversation teed up. I think we've got really interesting perspective and leaders from Cleveland to talk about the work that they've done, and I think we've got a great set of folks on the call from across the country that I think we're gonna have a really interesting conversation amongst the group on what to make of this, what we're seeing, what we think works, what we think we want to explore moving forward. Before I get into the substance of this, I want to just do a little bit of navigation and sort of alignment on how this webinar technology works. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this already. I've got up on my screen, hopefully something like what you see on your screen. This is the control panel. If you don't have this open right now, there's a little red, there should be a little red arrow icon in the upper right to click on to open it up. So that's what that's opens and closes the control panel. You can mute and unmute your mic after once we get into the discussion part of this. A little bit later on, we'll get into that. The blue box here shows the webinar in full screen instead of just within a panel. Make it a little bit easier to see. And then this is the part that's going to be important as we get into the discussion here. If you've got a question or if you want to make a comment, you can click raise your hand here, and that lets the organizers know that you want to speak. And we're controlling the muting and unmuting centrally, so we'll be able to unmute you to get you teed up and ready to go. And then as we're going, feel free to type in messages to the organizers. We've got this set up now so the messages will come through the organizers. So type in a message or a question. We'll look at it here, and then we can respond to it in real time or share it out with the rest of the group as appropriate. And then we can be sending questions and responses back to you in this chat box just above the question spot. So feel free just to type in a question to the organizer along the way. Okay, with that, let's get into who we've got on the phone here. I think we've got these folks represented, folks from across the country: Chicago, Boston, Nashville, New York, Baltimore, Lawrence, Madison, Wisconsin, and Denver. And for the most part, we are either CFOs, budget directors, we've got a deputy superintendent, deputy chief of schools, folks with direct responsibility for finance, for SBB, if you were moving down this path, and for school supervision or sort of overall district strategy. I thought it was interesting also that as you were registering, amongst this group, we've got folks that are in full implementation mode with SBB, folks that are in the early planning stages, and folks that are still in the exploration mode, just trying to learn more about it. So I think we've got a really nice, rich set of perspectives here, and look forward to getting the discussion teed up. So I want to say one note about questions from that you guys, that the attendees set as part of the as part of your registration for this. You can see the questions that many of you raised, are questions like these. And so I am hoping that we are able to touch on these questions over the course of the conversation today. I would say there were a few questions that were on very technical stuff that I think we've got, a number of us have lots of perspective on and would love to talk about. I think we want to take those offline or do as a separate sort of follow-up part to this conversation, just to make sure that we're really focused on the main topic. Okay, let's just do quick introductions to our webinar panelists. I'm thinking these are not our Facebook photos, but this is who we are: Jonathan Travers from ERS. And then we've got Dr. Michelle Pierre-Farid, the Chief Academic Officer; Megan Traum, Director of Strategic School Design and Academic Budgets. She will explain to you what that job means. And then we're very grateful to Vicky King joining us as principal from the Douglas MacArthur Girls Leadership Academy to talk about her specific experiences with SBB. And then we have a bonus optional panelist, Andrew Coons, who's one of the Cleveland Network leaders, and we'll talk about what that role means on the call as well. So thanks to the Cleveland folks for jumping into this with us. So let's get into the core assertion of the paper that's precipitated this webinar, and that paper, if you've not already encountered it, is available at ERS website, erstrategies.org. That student-based budgeting, having now reflected on our work in Cleveland and talking with the folks on this call and some of the other leaders in Cleveland, reflecting on the work that we've done related to SBB and a number of other districts across the country, we're coming to understand student-based budgeting to be an academic reform strategy and not not a financial reform strategy. It is a financial means to an academic end, is one way to think about it. And we know that a number of districts across the country, you all are pursuing SBB or exploring SBB primarily as a vehicle for a combination of three things: equity, transparency, and flexibility. And we think that that's great, but really, one of the things that we've been struck by is, how do you get from that to being able to make an argument that SBB is going to or is improving academic outcomes? What is the logic model? Like, what is the theory of strategy about SBB that is going to lead to improved student outcomes? We've followed that through and have lots of conversations with folks in Cleveland and a number of other places about that. We've come to understand and come to sort of have this perspective that it's what happens to the dollars once we get to the schoolhouse door that matters. So the way that SBB improves student outcomes is that school leaders, schools, teams reallocate their resources in ways that are fundamentally better connected to the student need and better connected to improving student outcomes. So we think of that as sort of strategic school design. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but two really important components to that are, one, that the school leader, that just does not happen automatically. It's not just that I hit this SPV button, this flexibility is opened, and all of a sudden school resources are reorganized. Two things are really important here. So first, we've got to get the school leaders are the folks who are making these decisions primarily. So we've got to get them supported, equipped, in positions to be able to make different decisions and not just continue what's happened to them previously. And as well, and really sort of related to that, we've got to rethink what the role of central office is. So we've got to change how central does business in order to effectively support some school leaders. And we'll touch on both of these things in a little bit more detail and hear from Cleveland specifically about the kinds of things that they've done differently through this last couple of years. I wanted to say one more thing about strategic school design. This is how we at ERS think about strategic school design. That the school leader is starting with a strong vision around what it will take for her students and teachers to be successful, and then reorganizing resources, not just financial, but people, time, technology, and money around that vision. And I would say informed by best practice and district strategy as well. So, but fundamentally, SPB gives school leaders and schools individually the opportunity to be able to reconfigure their resources, and that's the thing that we think is going to drive student outcomes, not just the implementation of a student-based budgeting system. As just one follow-up here, if you are interested in understanding how we think about school design or some tools that are available just online, these are all available through in our website in the school design area. So let's jump into about Cleveland. I want to turn it over to you, Michelle, in a minute. But basically, just introduce Dr. Michelle Pierre-Fried, CAO at CMSD. And I'd say, Michelle, I'd ask you in this introduction just to orient us a little bit to CMSD and sort of where you are in the implementation of SPB. You know, I'd say, so really specifically, why did the district go down this path? And where are you now in implementation? And how are you guys thinking about it connecting to the district's overall academic strategy? Just to sort of frame for folks where you are.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon to all the attendees. So I just wanted to kind of take you on the journey of how we went with the student-based budgeting. So actually it begins with our Cleveland plan. And so the city of Cleveland, with many partners, unions, foundations, decided to think about how are we going to dramatically change the student achievement for the children we serve in Cleveland. And everyone came around the portfolio strategy as the way, the conduit for us to be able to bring about change. And one of the key components of it is how do we look at our resources towards schools and how do we give schools more autonomy. And so coupled with that, that should help us bring about change. And so when you look in our Cleveland plan, it clearly speaks to that we were going to move more of our resources to schools. We were going to select great leaders and great teachers who can then make great decisions around what their children's needs are, and then put the resources, time, talent, and treasure around that to make sure it happens. And so from the Cleveland plan, then we started working with ERS to kind of walk us through what does it look like right now in our district at the time. So this was around 2012. And what were some of the underpinnings of decisions that we had made as a district and how it impacted our children. So how did we make decisions of staffing? So what schools got more staffing just because the principal, called the district office better or called more often? How did certain schools get more resources because they had better partnerships with different organizations versus some schools that just have a new principal and don't have any resources? And so we went back to the premise of what we believed that would turn around schools, which were that if great leaders had the resources with great teachers, they can bring about change, and that the change actually happens at the school level versus at the district level. And we will speak to that later on around how the central office also has to change to be able to support this work. So as we went through the journey, we realized there were a couple of key components that we did have to adapt to make this happen. One, we had to identify what did we believe actually would move student achievement. So we call them weights, and we felt like through data analysis of our student achievement, we found that there were a couple of things that impacted how our students did in student achievement and graduating. So a couple of things like attendance, discipline, the ELL factor. Of course, most of our schools look at special ed factors, and what would go into adding more funding for children with more needs. But then we said on the other side, we have schools that are doing really well and pushing kids above and beyond, and we also have this belief that we want our kids to take AP classes. We want them to take college credits, and so how do we weight those as well so that schools that are pushing their children at a higher level also get some funding to support other initiatives that we believed in as well. So once we went through that, then we decided that we wanted to take some time for our principals to have a conversation. And so we worked with a design team around what would this mean for you all, and we asked them to really look at it from a district lens versus just their school lens, because you can see how different way we weighted things could give certain schools more money. And so we really asked principals to get on that balcony and sit there and think through, like, how does this not impact just not only my school, but the whole district? And as a leader, what supports do I need to be able to implement this at the level that I would like? And so we actually started off with a small group of schools so that we could pilot it, run the financials against it, be able to have conversations at different points of the year to see how it impacted not only our schools, but the other departments that play a key factor in making schools run effectively. So how did it impact the talent office or the HR department? How did it impact the finance department, operations, and academics? And so throughout the year, we had those conversations to reflect on how do we broaden this and bring it to the rest of the district. And then we went into the next component based on the reflection from our pilot year to then taking it, quote unquote, to scale. And we really did have to, once again, think about how do we kind of wade into the water. But our CEO is actually very aggressive, and he said, we don't have time to wait. We're just going to go full throttle, and we're going to give as schools as much money as we can. We're going to push the CFO and the CAO to do that. And we also want to provide as much support to our schools. So we did use a lot of our professional development time with our principals and the central office to be able to think critically about what we can do to support the schools in this effort. Going into this year, so last year was our first year, and we're going into our third year of this work, and I think that the key takeaway is it is a lot of work, and that it does take time to have multiple stakeholder conversations about it, and it does mean stepping out on the ledge to say, you know, how do we make this work differently? And then the other piece is why we took this as an academic lens versus a financial lens, because we actually do believe that every school is a different unit of study almost. And we felt that if teachers and principals sat down and said, what will make our schools great? And what do our kids look like? And how do we use the funds to make differences? Then they would be in charge of it and own the key components of the work. And so it's great to hear conversations of principals now saying to us, like, I'm thinking that I would like to do X, Y, and Z because I'm noticing that my children want to be challenged this way. And those conversations couldn't happen 3 years ago because they wouldn't have the funding to be able to do that. Or they would have to come and ask permission from me or the CFO to be able to lead these discussions. But now they're sitting in teams and having those discussions and say, okay, now we're going to move our funds to this level because we want to use it in this way. And we're going to actually be concentrated because we know our second graders are coming up into third grade, a little bit lower, and so we're going to actually add another teacher to third grade so we can have small group instruction, and all of them could be on grade level by the end of third grade. And if you were in central office, you wouldn't even think to be able to do that for a school, but a school now having the ability to manage their time, talent, and treasure, they are having those critical conversations and pushing back on the central office around what do you need to do differently to support us and how can we grow around them. So hopefully, Jonathan, I kind of gone through the journey of where we were, what we went through, and now what we're going into the next school year with.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. I want to conversation going here and dig into a little bit more detail what we mean by making SPB an academic strategy. I want to give folks, at the same time, I want to give folks an opportunity to just pause and ask questions. So if you want to just follow up on something that Michelle just said in her overview, feel free to ask a question here on the side. Our paper makes this assertion that there are these 7 critical success factors to truly aligning SPB to an academic improvement strategy. We've laid them out here very succinctly, and I want to be able to talk a little bit about a few of these, give folks in Cleveland an opportunity to comment on them, and then sort of open up a more free-form conversation about them. So I want to first jump into leadership. I think in most of the systems that where we've done this kind of work and that we've seen it done across the country, the folks who are leading SPB are on the budget side. And they're facilitating the design conversations. They are the ones that are communicating to principals. Here's how this is going to roll out. Here's how you got your allocation, and so on. And that was, to some extent, the case in Cleveland initially. At the end of the first development year, Cleveland made a pretty significant shift to be able to, and sort of created this position that Megan is now in, to be able to bridge much more explicitly the relationship between the inputs, between budget and the strategy, the academics. And so, Megan, I want to sort of start with you and just ask you to describe a little bit your role and how you think about what you're doing. Is it financial? Is it academic? Like, how do you think about what you're trying to accomplish?
Great. Yes, thanks. Good afternoon. So as Jonathan said, I am the Director of Strategic School Design and Academic Student Budget. And a lot of people kind of raise an eyebrow and think, what is that? It really is kind of the bridge. I see the role that I play with the district coming out of that first year of implementation, where when talking about budgets, particularly with instructional leaders, it's kind of something that just squarely falls in the finance realm, and looking to see that that if this is going to be truly for reforming schools and looking at moving student achievement and looking at schools individually, that the academic piece needed to take the lead in this, but also working with finance, because we know that in order for principals at the principal level to be very successful with their schools, we have to have the resources adequately matched behind what each principal wants to do in their school. And sometimes there is a bridge between academic speak and finance speak. Finance departments often have very talented professionals that are squarely in finance, and academics has very talented professionals in academics, and sometimes there's a disconnect or a language barrier, so to speak. And so really taking the lead to make sure that we work to bridge that gap between having finance understand the needs and the wants and the reasons for principals, and vice versa, for principals to understand the needs and the wants of the finance department, and why budgets have to balance, and we do really have to strategically look at what resources do we have in our buildings, and how can we look at some trade-offs with resources if we're looking at how to move schools and student achievement. So really kind of leading that work to bridge academics and finance, as well as looking at the different departments and say, how do we kind of coordinate this so that everybody's on the same page? And now the questions from finance aren't just, do you have enough money? It's asking principals, what do you want to do? What's your goal? What's your vision? And then really understanding that from a different model, and then saying, okay, how can I help assist you with finding the right vendor or finding the right resource that could match that in a very strategic way. My background is as a teacher and then as a principal/supervisor, and was working in the district in that capacity, and I feel like that lens has really helped me, not only just to kind of better communicate with our finance people, where the seats of the principals and our network leaders in the academic department, but I've also grown professionally on my knowledge base of really understanding the ins and outs of, why certain financial, systems and things have to be done. So through that knowledge, I think we're kind of growing. My financial counterpart, the executive director of grants and or funds, is also learning more on the academic side. So we're kind of really building out a more cohesive, collaborative central office.
Thanks, Megan. We're starting to get in some questions, and so I'm going to try to embed those in the conversation as we go. I know, Dawn, you actually raised one that we're going to touch on and Seth, we're seeing it from Lawrence as well, that we're going to touch on in a second here. I want to move to topic 2, the second critical success factor, flexibilities, and bring a couple more voices into the conversation. So, so as you all know, a big part of SVB is figuring out which flexibilities we're going to give, which resources we're going to give principals flexibility over, and then unlocking those and seeing what folks can do. Our assertion in this paper is that we want to prioritize the flexibilities that best support strategic school design. So not all flexibilities in our perspective are created equal, and the ones that are most linked to sort of the academic, the instructional model of the school are the ones that are potentially most important to open up to schools. To bring in a couple of the questions, and let me come back to first Megan and Michelle and then Vicki. So Megan and Michelle, how have you guys been thinking about what resources you want to unlock or what flexibilities you want to provide? There's one question specifically around special ed, and there's another question on and what did you learn from between year 1 and year 2, or even year 2 to year 3 now? What have you learned about what flexibilities are more and less important?
So Megan and I can tag team on this. Megan really did handle the conversations between departments around flexibilities, and then we had discussions with principals. And the interesting thing is that principals really wanted to manage in the school, strategic school design, like what programs they were going to have in there, what does it look like, the selection of teachers who can really manage that work, and less about how much toilet paper they had to buy. Like, they didn't want to manage that. And so we really did lock things that really did not connect to instructional programming and work. We did give flexibility around staffing, and so they felt like they needed more staffing because they have a brand new building and they wanted more custodial staff. They could actually purchase that, but they didn't have to worry about toilet paper. Around the instructional components, we did make a lot of changes back and forth from year 1 and year 2, and Megan can kind of go into that in more depth. I think we wanted to be a little bit more liberal while teachers, principals and teachers were kind of shaping their schools, and then we found out that it led to principals having to manage more work, which they didn't want to do. And so then we said, we will not add that work to you, we'll keep that more central. So I think it was us thinking about what do principals want to manage when we were thinking about the flexibility. Also, what could they manage easily? And then what funding is connected to that to make sure that they can be able to deliver on some of their thoughts. So I'll turn it over to Megan to talk about some of the key decisions that we changed.
So looking at the flexibilities that were first targeted, we really looked at, as Dr. Pierfrey suggested, that those that are the high leverage ones, the ones that principals were saying that they wanted to have more flexibility over their people, their staffing, their time in the building, and other areas connected to instructional, achievement for their students. And it was a big learning. It was in the first year, a trial by error. Like we kind of looked to see. We don't want to open up everything because we know that, particularly with special education, there are pieces of special education that we could unlock around cross-categorical students. Because again, one of our goals is to really make more full inclusion for all of our schools, and so giving principals a little more flexibility around that was a key one, versus another one which would be maybe more compliance heavy. So we looked at a couple different factors of compliance, of scale, like was it something big enough or was it so minute that it really was not going to impact school designs and principals in a meaningful way that they could move their students forward in the buildings. And then we looked at, really having conversations with principals around like what are those things that you want to do that are most helpful. We also had to have many conversations within different departments, because this was also not only new for principals that they had these flexibilities to say like, wow, I can do this, this, and this. We also had to make sure that central office was aligned, because it's a different way of central office thinking and focusing on something that they've always kind of controlled and had a hand in, to now possibly having 100 different requests from principals wanting to do different things with things that have been traditionally held in their department. Another area that we really had to look at and are, I think, continuing constantly to look at is our collective bargaining agreement. So some of the flexibilities that we really sat down to explore, we had to look against our collective bargaining agreement to say what areas can we have some flexibility, what right now are we currently not flexible with, yet we need to go back and have some negotiations around how can we make the language in the contract fit more of what we are doing. And that's just the reality of kind of making sure that all the other processes in the evolutions are happening. We also, from year 1 to year 2 and then year 2 to this current year that we're in, convened a design team that was made up of principals. There was also, from year 1, it was mostly principals, and then the next year we actually increased the design team to include central office department folks so that they also could hear what the principals were saying, to go back to their teams to say, hey, look, these are what principals are wanting. How can we look at what flexibilities that we have currently, and how can we make them more flexible, particularly around security officers. Even though that is something that is currently lacked, principals are saying, I'd like to have a say in their evaluations. They're in my building every day. So even though that is a lacked resource, one that centrally office is controlled, there are some flexibilities now that we were able to get in with the principals, with the security guards contract, that allow for principal voice in their evaluation. And it's an ever evolving process to say how can we align all of those pieces so that we can really look at those flexibilities that are wanted by principals and the ones that we feel are going to be most useful and helpful in their plans.
Thanks, Megan. Vicki, in the paper, there's a little bit of a profile of your school there and your experience in that first year. I would love for you to give a little bit of an introduction to the group on Douglas MacArthur School for Girls. Do I have the name right? Yep. To your school, and then a little bit about how you've experienced the flexibility. What has been helpful? What has been, frankly, authentic versus on paper? Have you experienced sort of a gap there? And what do you feel like that flexibility has enabled for you that you weren't previously able to achieve?
Sure. Good afternoon. Douglas MacArthur Girls Leadership Academy is obviously an all-girls school. We're on the west side of Cleveland. We serve approximately 320 girls in grades pre-K through 8th grade. Will be my 4th year as a leader in that building, and I'll just give some examples along the way so that you can relate to the different topics we've been talking about in terms of flexibility with staff and whatnot. My first year, we had HR just assigned, based on my numbers, how many encore teachers I have. And our encore teachers, that's their title. That's like your art, PE, music, those types of teachers. So my first year I had 1.5 art teachers. Well, there was no need for my building to have a full-time art teacher and a part-time art teacher. Not only did my building not physically allow for that, students don't need art 3 times a week. So what we were able to do as my FBB team, and I guess I should also say that I also include teachers. I created a team, we called it the FBB team. So we all sat down collectively and talked about like the strengths and the weaknesses that our building had and what we would like to see, where we would like to see our girls go. So one of the things was obviously we don't need all these art teachers. Our math scores were pretty low compared to our reading scores. So what we were able to do was use our money to implement a math intervention teacher. And last year we also really focused on our schedule and how we could work in more collaboration time with our teachers. Obviously, we are a single-gender academy, and there's another single-gender academy on the east side, and we wanted more time that we could collaborate with that school, so we were able to kind of work it in our schedule for some early release days where we collaborate with the other girls' school for some professional development for our teachers so that we're really focusing on meeting the needs of girls. Also this year, based on just the amount of money we were allocated, one of the things we're noticing with all the new standardized testing that's done online, we just do not have the technology in my building to make it an effective tool for kids. We noticed that not only we didn't have enough computers for the students to take the test, but then we don't even have the computers to teach them those resources. So this year we're going to be using part of our money to purchase new laptops and things like that so that the girls can really learn the technology piece to make them more successful. I'm not sure if I answered all those questions, but just wanted to give some specific examples how, the student-based budgeting was used in my school.
Great, thanks, Vicki. I wanted to touch on a couple more points here and then do a little bit of a broader discussion. I think this process point here, often pre-SBB, there is a school improvement planning process or an academic improvement process that is largely disconnected from the district's overall budget and staff process, which is largely disconnected from a master schedule development process. I think one of the things that I think the majority of us, as we have implemented SBB, have done is try to combine and align these processes so that it's much clearer coming into the budgeting, when you get your allocation, that you've thought critically about academically and performance-wise, what are you trying to accomplish in your school? And you heard Vicki very clearly say that she had identified this gap in math, and frankly, took the flexibility financially that SBB provided and invested it to try to better meet that need. And I think there's a lot of process stuff that's important to get right, both in terms of making the sequence of events, the schedule for the different parts of this fit together, but also just the structure of it. So we'll keep going here, but I think Cleveland has done some very interesting work around building out the actual forms to be aligned with each other, to be able to almost walk principals through this idea of understanding our needs, allocating our resources, creating our schedule, and so on. I want to talk a bit about collaboration here. This is part that I think there's a little bit of a technical solution here about how do we reorganize responsibilities to help central office become service providers and non-compliant towns. I think there's also a softer, a more adaptive kind of change here around sort of the culture of the role of central office in supporting principals. And so on this one, Megan, two parts on this. Megan, would love you to touch on, just describe the network support teams and really concretely, how do they engage with principals and their teams? And then Vicki, how have you experienced that? What's worked, what hasn't worked, what do you like, what do you not like?
Yeah, so we, looking at how year one went, knowing that we needed to better support principals through this process, as well as bring different departments into the fold. We created, through different pieces of work with the academics department as well as the entire district, to find each department to have a network support team. So currently we have 7. I believe we're moving to 8 networks next year that are all led by a network support leader, previously called academic superintendents. And each of the network support leaders has a bucket of about 10 to 13 schools, 10 to 15 schools in it. And within that, each of the departments has an assigned partner that works underneath and in collaboration with the network leader. So our talent office has a partner, special education has a partner, curriculum instruction, finance has a partner, and they work together to support the network leader's work as well as the principal's work, and better seeking to understand what the principals are trying to do, and then how to take down some barriers in order to get to yes for our principals and their plans. As far as like the way that they have functioned and are directly supporting principals, we're lucky enough today to have Andrew Kuntz with us. He is our network support leader for the Achievement and Gifted Network, and so he can talk a little bit about how he functions in support of his principals with his team.
Hi, everybody. So we, along with my partners, my HR partner, my special ed, finance, curriculum instruction, operations partners,
Oh, we seem to have lost Andrew.
am I back on?
Yeah.
There you go. You're back on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So we meet on a semi-regular basis, both at schools to do learning walks, provide information to the principal and their staffs regarding things that we've seen in the non-evaluative method that we have. That one helps the partners who typically are traditionally have been based at central office, and getting them out into the schools allows them to see one, how their decisions are being affecting student learning, and also just to see how schools operate and how they can best serve those schools. And then we also have central meetings in which we talk about the budget, and we might talk about their academic achievement plans, and then help the principals guide them through the myriad of budget decisions that are impacting their instructional practices. And the principals really have found this useful, especially as they have now taken on almost 70% of their budget, going from around 2% to 70%. It's a large jump. And so for many of the principals, that's not something that they have been accustomed to. And so having a finance partner, having a human resource partner who somebody can help and recruit teachers is an added bonus and benefit to a principal who may not have the time to go out and recruit teachers or balance a checkbook or figure out who the proper people are to do the purchase order through. So many of these resources, while new and the central office is sort of adjusting to it, the principals are learning as well. And so being able to sit in a network and sort of problem solve around some of the issues that we have has helped my team, and it's also helped the principals get things done more efficiently and more effectively.
And I just wanted to add a little piece, because I know if I was sitting on this call, I'd be like, well, where do they find all these people to just take on these roles? And really, we just reshifted people's work, and we're doing a lot of training of the people to be able to take on these roles. So we might have added a couple of roles, but really we just reshifted and reframed the role of the people who are engaging with our schools. And I think a wonderful example of how they are trying to be much more of a service provider versus compliance is we were struggling about with one school, like they just didn't have enough teachers. We gave them money, but based on the kids, and they got extra funding, and it still did not work. And to see this talent officer with the network support leader and the principal and the HR partner sit there and figure out like what went wrong, why did the formula not work for the school, but then how do we help the school? Because at the end of the day, we came back to the fact of the school has to increase student achievement for children, and what do we do in support of that? And that's how we finalized and finished the answer, was getting to that yes, that this would make sure that children got the education that they deserve, versus how we would have done it in the past would have been all behind closed doors. We would have said, all right, we're going to just take money from this other school and move it over here. And then we would have sent the academic soup network support leader out to the school to tell them and be like, yeah, sucks for you, you're losing a teacher, but good luck to you because you got a new teacher. Not sure what the grade level is, but work it out. And this was a very different conversation, and that everyone felt empowered, everyone understood the rationale why it happened, and at the end, we did what was right by kids. To make sure that the scholars that we have in that building had the right amount of staffing and support.
Great, thanks. I want to keep us moving in the interest of time and just touch one final piece here around so the preparation and models and how we think about accountability. So our assertion around preparation for this new responsibility for principals and ongoing is that it is easy to lose the strategic in the technical. There's a whole bunch of work we've got to do to make sure folks understand their allocation, understand what the rules are for what things they've got flexibility over, what they don't, for how to read the forms on how to fill out budgets, their budget and staffing forms, but that by itself doesn't lead to better design. We've got to be able to educate school leaders as part of their engagement on what effective school design looks like, and make sure that we've got time and space in their learning for that. We also think that it's important not to do so in the abstract. We think that it's important to give examples of strategic school design. In some ways, this can be perceived as counterintuitive. Like on the one hand, we're saying, hey, here's a model that works. We are not saying, or potentially contradictory, not counterintuitive, like we're not saying, go do this model. You have the flexibility to decide. However, we want to be able to show you very specific concrete examples of designs that are effective and that are getting the results that we're aspiring for. And that we want to make sure that in our feedback, we've got accountability structures in place around the support for school design in the process. So I just want to ask for a couple of final comments here and then open it up. Vicki, you were part of the Transformation School pilot. I believe that was the first group that went through this. Can you talk about the support that you got through that and how you feel like sort of conversations that you've had about school design have influenced or not the choices you've made?
Sure. So the first year when it was being piloted, I had a partner from ERS that came and worked with me and my staff directly on how to navigate this whole process. And I thought it was extremely beneficial because she had gone through it and she was able to bounce ideas off of us. So one day she spent with us just really getting to know my school and my staff, looked at our data with us, helped us analyze it, looked at our strengths and weaknesses, and we met several times, probably at least 6 times, in a matter of 3 months, to really look at all of our data and help come up with a school design, and it was very beneficial. It was also beneficial that I had members of my staff with me because I had only been at the school for 3 years. There's staff members that have been there longer and might have known the history a little bit better than I, so I think it's always good to involve your staff members as well and to help get them on board.
Great, thanks. And Michelle, I think the sort of final question here to you, then I want to open up the broader conversation. One of the challenges that we hear and see about SBB is that it expands the principal role and it expands what we want principals to be able to know and do well. Like, do you have any, like, how has your perspective on this evolved? Like, how are you thinking about how SBB fits into your vision for what an effective principal looks like and can do?
Yeah, so I think that even my vision around the principal has evolved throughout this process. So one thing is that we really do want to keep them focused on the instructional leadership role, and then using the resources that they're provided and thinking about that strategically. But they technically did have to learn some budget stuff that they didn't know previously. They had to learn how to access my budget files, stuff like that. But I think, as Andrew kind of spoke to, we try to have the supports around them so they don't have to do the heavy lifting of that. More of the conversation is around their strategic school design, and then the funding comes after. And so I think that's the important piece. So if we want them to be instructional leaders, we want them to think about their student achievement first. And from that, we then say, okay, so what funding do you have to support this vision that you have for the school? I think it is still difficult for our schools, and I think it's still difficult for the central office to know when do we provide the extra support, when do we direct, when do we pull back the support for the principal, or, you know, just own it for the principal because they might not be implementing it well. So I think we're still balancing that part of our conversation, and we'll probably have a deeper conversation about that for this upcoming school year. And then giving principals the amount of time they need to actually do this work. And so we're realizing that we do need to back up our timeline a little bit and give more time to, as Vicki talked about, having deeper conversations at the school level first before they go into the budget and then plan it. But I think that from the CMSD side of supporting that, the partners actually need to have a deeper understanding of where the school is going. So this summer, we actually had all of the partners around the table and looking at the school improvement plans of every single school that they support. We call them the academic achievement plan, and their school design, and making sure that they align, making sure that their goals were rigorous enough, but then they have the resources to support those goals. So if they saw something about, like, they're going to have this new intervention program, and then the finance partner looked in the budget and was like, they actually didn't fund this, then they could all have a conversation about where could they actually move money, and then come back to the principal and say, we noticed that this was in your plan. We didn't really see the alignment for the funding. How can we support you in making that decision? So I think that is how we have evolved, but really trying to keep the principal more focused around the instructional framework, the strategic school design, and then having the ability to say where funding needs to go. But behind the scenes, the partners are really doing the heavy lifting for the principal.
Great,
just
thanks.
to piggyback on that, as a principal, I did not find this process difficult at all. I did not feel overwhelmed with it or felt like I didn't know enough about money or budgets to handle it. I thought it was very easy to navigate, and there was a lot of supports to reach out to if you had questions.
Great. Okay. I want to shift to the more open-ended part of this, and John Kennedy, CFO Baltimore, open up your mic. And you raised a question that I think is sort of the fundamental return on investment question here. So go ahead and sort of ask it, and it would be helpful to sort of hear a little bit about sort of what's behind the question.
Yeah, so I guess, so the question itself was what were the lessons learned from the year one implementation to where you are right now. And so what I'm interested in, when we make in school districts significant changes in some process, and certainly how we fund schools and giving autonomy to principals is a significant change. When we make those types of changes, how do we periodically take a look at what's working, what needs to be adjusted, and so that we can make sure that the overall design of the change is going to be effective. So the question is really about you guys have you've started in 2012 on the design. You've done a year one implementation. I'm not clear whether you're going to your second year now or your third year, but have you had the opportunity to step back and say what has worked initially and where we need to make some either tweaks or major overhauls?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. We are actually going into, we've just finished up, we had our first year of full implementation. We did have some pilots that were done in the first year, so we're kind of in year 2, year 3, for second year now of implementation for everybody, but they've gone through 2 budget cycles for the principals. I think the big, we didn't have really initially a process in place, but quickly learned we needed to have one to be able to look to see like what worked, what didn't. We have a couple different checkpoints within our network support team structure. We have the network teams coming together and looking at plans that are helped in the spring, and then we look at the summer. And so the network support team looks to see what flexibilities were used and what were available to principals and what were used and what were not used in the planning of the schools when they met in the summer. Another way that we gain information is we sent out surveys to principals to ask them about what flexibilities that they thought were helpful, what processes they thought were helpful, even down to their partners to say like were they helpful or were they not helpful in this process, to see does the network support structure need to change. From year 1 to year 2, we looked at the network support team structure from the feedback we got from not only just the principals but also the central office staff that were on it, was that the network support teams needed more partners. Initially, they only had 3 partners: special education, finance, and talent. We learned quickly that operations needed a seat at the table, that legal had to have someone representing, that our FACE office, our Family and Community Engagement office, had to have someone representing, attendance, so lots of different people at the table to have a voice to really kind of work at a very strategic level at the schools to understand and to kind of coordinate initiatives. So we use that information. Then we also do focus groups with principals. Our principal focus group is coming up here, in which principals are brought into a room and just kind of asked to say, hey, what's working, what's not, on a basis of anonymity, so that we can find out what's really behind the scenes and get more information on, like, this was given to you as a flexibility, but you didn't really find it flexible, why? And then really record that in a qualitative way to raise it to our Chief Academic Officer, our Chief Finance Officer, our Chief Talent Officer, et cetera, so that we can go back and see, like, how can we retool this so that it can be more flexible? Or these were given flexibilities and I didn't really need them or want them, and then where can we then spend our time?
Let me just add one more thing. Like for a specific example, we had a lot of schools who wanted to change their start times, and we didn't have the right people at the tables to do so. And what we probably underestimated was the impact it had on busing and transportation. And because we didn't have those people at the table, principals were led to believe that they had more flexibility than what ended up being. And so that's what we learned through this process, is that a lot of these decisions that were being made have some incredible amount of complexity in making those decisions, and you just sort of have to think those things through. And unfortunately, we sort of wandered through it to find out. But those are examples. If you had to err on the side of including too many people as opposed to only including a few.
Thanks, Andrew. We're coming to the end of the hour here. If folks have other questions, now is sort of your last call on that. I would I guess just ask, there's a broader question here, which is, what has been the return on investment of SBB for CMSD to date? How are you, and Michelle, or anyone there, like, how are you thinking about ultimately the performance improvements? Like, how are you thinking about the relationship so far between changes in performance and changes in along these lines, changes in funding and school design?
So I think that we're looking at it from a couple different lenses. Looking at what principals are able to do, our theory of action is that principals best know what they need in a very targeted way at the building to move their students. And so what we have done is to really look to support principals around their school goals and their strategic school design, and not necessarily impose a network goal on them, but to really look at, what are their goals tied to the greater goals of the network or the district, but, what are their goals? How are they going to be able to push and move, and where do they need to based on their data? And within the strategic school design piece, it gives them the autonomy and the flexibility to be able to do that in a very strategic way and not just take a one-size-fits-all, this is the district goal. Well, that might not have been Vicki's main concern, attendance, if it was a district goal. And so really getting her to look at her data differently and target those points of a reading or math or whatever she was seeing her data to point to really be able to serve kids. We have, it's pretty much an east and west side city. The north side is the lake. It'll be very wet. We have very different needs in the city and different neighborhoods and different community stakeholders. And so giving that autonomy to principals around that, and then also to resources. So there's certain resources that come at a cost-neutral price to certain schools because of where they sit in the city. Others have to pay for certain other ones, and vice versa. So what we're looking at is seeing, we haven't really gotten our test data in, but we are starting to see early indicators of improvements in graduation rates and improvements in testing scores, particularly around third grade, that we can really speak to say that we're starting to see the needle shift. We're still kind of in the baby step stages, I think, to be able to say, like, for sure this has moved it, but it has definitely changed the focus and the conversation with principals and their network leaders, as well as the focus of the district to work in a more unified, collaborative, breaking down the silos way that really is supportive of schools and really supportive and looking at individual students, not just as data points, but what are the individual needs of students broken all the way down to the student sitting in, Miss Orbandy's third grade math class. Like, we're really looking at it from that lens, and this has been the process and the structure that has allowed us to better support that and be able to do that, quite honestly, in a way that makes sense.
I think the student achievement has not come back, so we have not been able to actually see the difference. I think it also has changed our conversations with community stakeholders and our principals. So there used to be a way to just blame downtown for everything, and now you really can't because you actually own the process. But it does allow the community to be more connected to the principals and talk about what they feel is needed for their school that they didn't have the ability to have previously. So I do think it's helping us to build stronger relationships with our key stakeholders, like our parents, our scholars, and the community.
Okay, great. You know what? We are at the end of our hour here, or past the end of our hour. I want to thank the folks from Cleveland, Andrew, Vicki, Michelle, and Megan, so much for sharing the work to date. Obviously, as you heard, this is a journey, and we've learned a lot in this first part of the journey, and we've got a much clearer sense of what we need to do to get to where we want. And so, yeah, I just want to say we're grateful to you guys for sharing this, and grateful to folks on the call here for jumping in. Feel free to follow up if you've got additional questions. I'm happy to connect folks after the call, and other questions that came in sort of that were more technical, we will follow up on those offline as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.